Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Courtney Nelson, president of City Club. For 100 years, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and explore. We're gathered at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB or viewing on Portland Community Media or YouTube. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine, and our current Friday Forum sponsors are Chevron Corporation, Eco Northwest, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Vacasa Vacation Rentals. Please show your appreciation for all of them. Our topic today at Friday Forum is World Refugee Day. Everyday war forces thousands of families to flee their homes. Over the past decades, Oregon has been the land of opportunity and a safe haven for many refugees to resettle as we continue to open our doors as a state to refugees. Please join us to hear amazing stories from local refugees, immigrants, and leaders as we discuss Portland's role in accepting, sheltering, and empowering refugees. Today's panelists are Victoria Cross with Multnomah County Central Human Resources, Zack Muhammad, Leadership Development Coordinator with Unite Oregon, Linda Castillo, Mental Health and Community-Based Services with the Latino Network, and Subedi with Portland Parks and Recreation. Our moderator is Nissan Kwan, Policy Advisor for Multnomah County Commissioner Loretta Smith. Please welcome our moderator and panelists here today.
Good afternoon. My name is Nissan Kwan, and I'm the Policy Advisor for Multnomah County Commissioner Loretta Smith. Before we go, I thought it would be wonderful. We did a few introductions, and I'm wondering if our panelists can talk a little bit briefly about your journey to Portland as a refugee, and after that, I'll go and take time to introduce myself too. Linda, do you want to go first?
I can do an introduction of myself as a first-generation immigrant. So in many respects, the definition of immigrant and refugee is a very politicized kind of term. Many immigrants actually come because they are fearful of their life or their experience in the other country, their home country. My parents came in the late 50s. My father was a guest worker from Mexico, and my mother had, her family had crossed back and forth from Mexico when it was a Mexican territory. So we have been in this country as a first-generation family, and have lived in California and now in Oregon. And our experience has been one of really having Spanish be our first language in our home, having the experience of being farm workers and experiencing poverty and extreme racism and bias in our home life. And then to the point now where the children are, myself included and my sister, have master's degrees and wonderful opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think it's on.
A quarter century ago, due to Bhutan's king repressive one nation, one people policy, I and my family and 100,000 Hindu minorities who are Nepali-speaking Southern Bhutanese, they are called Osampas, we are forcefully evicted from Bhutan. I was so little when I left Bhutan, and I didn't want to leave, but mom was, I still remember mom was kind of pulling me towards India. So my grandfather, who worked years and years building the country, hospitals, schools, he was forced to leave the country, and my uncle was kind of put in prison, and we were forced to leave the country. So I was sent to Nepal, where I lived almost 2 decades without a life of hope and future. Typical day is getting up from the mud bed, where there's a thatched roof, bamboo hut, get the bag, get into the school where there are not that much resources, not that good teachers or libraries or books to read or bikes to ride. It's kind of, and then my father worked for a day for 30 cents. And one night I saw him pouring icy water over his head. And I asked him, why did you do this? And he said, due to trauma and the displacement, I am tired and traumatized, so I cannot sleep. So that's the life I spent. And in 2008, I, with my family, came to Portland, and with $10 in my pants pocket and a plastic bag. And I struggled, I rebooted, I relearned whatever it takes to be a new Portlanders. And I will share my story later. I'm here today.
Hi. When most immigrants and refugees picture the United States, they think about Manhattan, Hollywood, well, at least Las Vegas. I eventually landed in Scappoose. When my father visited, he looked at the window and the car when I drove him from Tacoma airport, and he said, like, where is America? My name is Victoria Cross. Since 2015, I'm working at Multnomah County. I started at the health department. Last few years, I joined Central Human Resources team. All my job at the health department and human resources, I work with employees who refugees and immigrants. And I actually work with communities and trying to link them to the services that we provided for communities and for employees as well. When I arrived, I very quickly realized that learning about, like, reading American literature, watching American movies, TV shows, it's not enough to know what for you in American workforce. 5 years ago, I organized employee resource group for refugee and immigrants. It's first kind group in the United States. 74 people formally applied on our Office Diversity and Equity webpage to be a member. We open for all county employees who are refugees and immigrants, and for our allies. I just want to let you know that how many people come from different countries to realize. I will probably use my notes. And it's only people who work in at Multnomah County. We have people from former Soviet Union republics, how 15 republics at least, Poland, France, Somalia, Guatemala, Mexico, Brazil, China, Vietnam, Nigeria, Kenya, Cuba, Korea, Laos, Philippines, Ghana, Dominican Republic, South Africa, Morocco, Nepal, Peru, Romania, Chile, Middle East, Honduras, and I actually can continue, but I need to give opportunity to talk another panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zack Muhammad, and I was born in Somalia in 1990. And when I was 6 months old, me and my family had to seek refuge out of Somalia because there was a civil war that was kind of bubbling in the mid-'80s, and it kind of turned into something that was very drastic and had to have a lot of Somali people leave the country. And we had to seek refuge in Kenya, and what most people don't understand is you might think undocumented people are only people in America, but folks who are seeking refuge, people who are leaving their countries to go to another country are also undocumented. And what that means is lack of resources, such as financial resources to get the job. Healthcare is not accessible as you would think for people seeking refuge, and it was very difficult for my family to be able to go on the journey from Somalia to Kenya. And especially as an infant myself, I hear stories of my mother of how difficult it was she didn't have the strength to be able to nurture me, as breastfeeding is a common thing for a lot of people in different countries, and being able to seek some of the ways that folks were helping out the UN and whatnot, and then diapers as well too, of using cloth as a means to take care of me and to take care of all of my siblings. And we lived in Kenya for about 5 years, and we were pretty lucky to be able to come to America because of the clan that I come from. So Somali Civil War was started because of clan-based tensions and ways that people were fighting against each other. And because of my clan, we were one of the first people to be able to come to America. And my journey doesn't really start in Portland. It started in Maryland because my family wanted to start anew fresh, to be able to say that I did it, to be able to buy into the American dream of trying to start from nothing to be able to be comfortable. But that was kind of hectic and difficult for my mom to be able to do this as a single mother. And 5 years later, we were able to come to Portland because most of my family members were here. And one thing that is very common for a lot of immigrants and refugees is we tend to live amongst each other, just because we know that if something goes wrong, that we are able to have the whole family come to us. It definitely takes a village, and how we are able to share resources, share information, being able to help one another is something very common that all the panelists over here will probably agree with me as well too. Thank you.
And I am Nissan Kwan, and I am among the over 200,000 overseas Koreans who were adopted after the Korean War. I was born in Korea and adopted as an infant. I became a United States citizen when I was 7 years old, and I recall going through that process. And I was raised on the East Coast before moving to the Pacific Northwest. I would say that my interest in immigration and the movement of people, but also this early on fascination with what circumstances lead people to have to move, and what governments play in their role in facilitating that migration or forcing that migration, I think came from my early circumstances growing up in a predominantly white community in New England, and then being raised with some family in New York City as well, and then coming to Portland, Oregon, which was a big transition. And my own background involves fine and performing arts and community organizing and advocacy, as well as work in public policy and politics. And I think throughout that, I've been very fascinated by what government and policy do to intersect and communicate and create access for their communities. And I guess if you're just tuning in for today's Friday Forum, I am Nissan Kwan, joined by Victoria Cross, Multnomah County Central Human Resources, Zack Muhammad, the Leadership Development Coordinator with Unite Oregon, Linda Castillo, Mental Health and Community-Based Services at Latino Network, and Subedi, Portland Parks and Recreation. And with that, I'm wondering if our panelists can talk about some of the challenges you've faced here in Portland, which has gained some national attention as being the whitest city in America.
Sure. I think some of the challenges that our community has certainly faced is a great deal of bias and racism and discrimination, not only in their home life, but in their workplace and in their schools, and really trying to provide a very positive narrative in terms of what immigrant families bring to this community in terms of culture and food and language and family integrity and ambition and entrepreneurial spirit. I think we're really working on trying to change the narrative so folks really see the strengths that our community brings instead of some disparaging kinds of information that gets placed out there. And so I think for us, it's really important in terms of the development of our children, for adults who have had a lot of trauma in terms of this immigration process, really developing a very strong self-concept and self-identity for their children, and really emphasizing the importance of retaining culture and language. Many of our communities early in the 50s and in the 60s really told their children, don't say that you're Hispanic, don't say that you're Latino, don't speak Spanish. And in some families just really did not teach their children Spanish, which created a huge disconnection for those children and those families from a very important strength and an asset within themselves. And now we're really reclaiming that in terms of really just providing a better understanding of where people come from, who their identities are, who their families are, what their strengths and assets are culturally in terms of language and rituals and routines, and all the beliefs that come along with that. It's a very rich culture. And many of our countries, you know, as border countries, really nourish and inform each other in terms of food and language and religion and a variety of other activities. So I think it's really been the challenge of really that balance of really continuing to provide a strength-based perspective in terms of who we are and where we are and what we bring to our community. And it really, in some parts of Oregon, it's been very difficult. I know some individuals find themselves followed on highways by police for many, many miles, just waiting for something to happen, or followed around in stores, just waiting for something to happen. And it really creates this sense of being the other and not being welcome in this community. And so I really urge everyone to kind of think about that. What would that be like? You walk into a store and people are watching you. They're watching your every move. They're suspecting that you're going to steal something and you're just there to buy something. Or you get to the register and they don't only ask for one piece of ID, but they ask for 3 pieces of ID when everyone else has just been asked for 1. So I think this kind of experience for folks is just very disappointing, very much gives you the feeling you're not welcome and you don't belong. I think another piece that folks experiences on a daily basis, kind of these microaggressions and micro insults of invalidating who people are. I don't know if folks recently heard the report of the Fox News person who's, you know, made this commentary about a Mexican-American valedictorian. And it's, I didn't know Mexicans were that smart. You know, these kinds of things every day happen. There are these micro insults that are just very difficult for folks. So just really, you know, encouraging folks to kind of think about when you say these things or when they occur to you, really think about where that comes from, because it does have a harmful effect of, you know, what they call 1 million paper cuts and the death by 1 million paper cuts. So something that's really important to understand.
Linda, I appreciate your comment about the variance that can happen in asking for identification, and which made me think a lot about kind of this conversation about equity, which I think is a really great segue into the next question that I have for Sam. And I'm wondering, as a city employee and member of the New Portlander Policy Committee, and thinking about equity, can you tell us about some of the work Portland City Council has done with the New Portlander Policy Council and the New Portlander new programs, and how these programs or other policies can benefit the refugee community here in Portland?
So now the recent trend is when something bad happens to America, the blame goes to refugees. So that's what's going on. It's so unfortunate. The refugees are already vulnerable from their governments, home governments, police practices, and the prosecution they had to go, and the violence and the war. Even though when they come to America, and especially in Portland, I found my friends and mentors little welcoming. They're more compassion towards refugees, but I didn't kind of go through without challenges. When I took my certificate to PSU of my bachelor's degree, they didn't validate, so they told me I had 72 credits left to do my bachelor's here. So spending that time and energy and other thing. So we have this kind of crazy discrimination for refugees is still going on. But as a city government coming to work with the city, I know I have first-hand experience what it means to be a refugee in Portland and what are the challenges, concerns, starting their life. So let me go back to my little background. I worked for refugees in Portland for 5 years at one of the refugee resettlement organizations. So there are 9 federal agencies serving refugees, and Portland has 3 refugee resettlement agencies. They are called BOLACs. They are Lutheran, Catholic, and SOAR. So I worked for them for 5 years, and I resettled refugees from airport to connecting to the resources, to the neighborhood, to schools, to hospitals, to the system here. So I have that experience. So when I joined city from last year, I brought that experience. So when a refugee comes to Portland, I'm in good connection with the refugee resettlement agencies. So last month, under Parks for New Portlanders program, we welcome a Syrian family in the park. That's first in the nation. So no one has done that. And our mayor went, our county chair went, Commissioner Steve Novick went, and other city officials went there and welcomed refugees, saying them, this city belongs to you, this program belongs to you, welcome to Portland. There is no other way we can welcome more than this. So they feel way welcomed, and there's a family involved to resettle them now. So it's so interesting in Portland. There is a kind of myth that when refugee comes into America, they are forced to turn to Christianity, but that's just happening opposite in Portland. So there's a Christian family helping a Muslim family from Syria. So they connected the family to the church, to mosque, and they are going to mosque. So this is how all, like mentors, volunteers, city programs, they are helping now. And also, we have critical services programs in the city. And this is just to connect them. In 2013, IRCO, Immigrant and Refugee Organization, did a little research, and they found refugees are very engaged, from 70 to 80% within their community. So city has to just bridge that gap, and I am doing that thing now.
Thank you. And I'm struck by hearing, this concept of welcoming, and also knowing that the city is thinking about its hiring practices, which I think is a great way to go into our next question, which is for Victoria, who works with Central Human Resources, and Zack Muhammad. And so given your experiences both in and outside of government, in grassroots or community-based organizing, and thinking about this concept of welcoming and creating spaces for newcomers to connect with their government, what are areas either Portland, local, or state government can continue to improve its accountability and access to all people who live in its jurisdictions? Victoria?
First of all, I just want to say how difficult and long journey for immigrants and for refugees to come to United States. Sometimes it takes years, and I look at the United Nations website, it's still to the 17 years. People come into the country, they need to apply. First of all, they went through medical screening, and before they enter United States, they have to bring all the documents. They go through a series of interviews. They were fingerprinted. It's a long journey, but like county is helping new refugees. We have Mid-County Health Center where the refugees going through the first medical screening when they arrived in Oregon. How we can welcome, just help to acknowledge that it's important to be there, to be here, because it's, from my perspective, refugees and immigrants bringing so much to Portland, to Oregon. I'm thinking like, what you would do if you have to flee, if your family is in danger? Will you stay or will you flee? They come and they have this courage, they have skills, they have diverse experience, and I think it's so important to utilize those skills, those experience, and really courage, because people went through tremendous trauma and tremendous difficulty. When you come and you have to figure it out without roadmap, without any advises you need to figure it out how to survive, how to live there, how to apply your skills. So that's.
Zach, do you see any additional ways that state and local governments can continue to be accessible and also create internal changes as well as welcoming and thinking about welcoming these newcomers, what these governments can do to be holding themselves accountable to these changes?
Definitely. One thing I want to say is acknowledging history of how racist and ways this state actually was trying to push away people and not letting people in to be able to start a new life, to be able to do what they needed to do for their families, for their friends, for whatever. And one thing that I would also let state government, city government, local government is basically don't tokenize people of color, don't tokenize immigrants and refugees. Just because you have one person on your staff or on your board or on your commission doesn't mean that, oh, we check this box, that we are able to say that we are very liberal, that we are doing the right thing for Oregon, and also standing in solidarity with whatever is happening, such as the Orlando situation right now of where we're noticing Latinx people are hurt right now. And what does that mean? Going to the Latinx community, the queer Latinx community, and asking them, how can we be better allies is another thing. And allyship looks so many ways. And there's sometimes that when you need to be an ally, you just need to shut up and just listen, and being able to learn from who's most affected, who's the voices that are need to be heard. And then retention is a big thing. We know that within a lot of these agencies and ways that people of color, immigrants and refugees are coming into these positions, that there is a lot of turnovers. And how can you make sure that that turnover is not a real thing, and that people are able to make it better for the next person that comes in as well too?
If you are just tuning in for today's Friday Forum, I am Nissan Kwan, joined by Victoria Cross with Multnomah County Central Human Resources, Zack Muhammad, Leadership Development Coordinator at Unite Oregon, Linda Castillo, Mental Health and Community-Based Services with Latino Network, and Subedi with Portland Parks and Recreation. This first question is for Linda, and then it's posed to the group. What are your perspectives as recent events have unfolded and we find ourselves in the midst of a presidential election, along with other heartbreaking current recent events that have highlighted immigration as an issue of concern and intersection with other communities that are vulnerable in our community?
Well, it's definitely been a heartbreaking year for a variety of reasons. Certainly with this presidential process that we have going, there's a lot of rhetoric going around that really kind of creates fear and baits fear and encourages kind of a fear-based kind of community that divides people and doesn't look at ways to unite people and look at strengths of difference rather than seeing difference as something frightening and divisive. So that's certainly disheartening. And certainly the event that happened in Orlando is our community is really struggling with all of this. As you may have heard, majority of the victims were Latino, Latinx, which is a term that many of us are beginning to use more and more. That's an inclusive term. Spanish tends to be pretty gendered, female, male. The X now really is more inclusive of the whole gender as a fluid kind of definition. So you might start to see that more Latinx. And so for our community, that's really something that we're struggling with, because then it also brings this thing about hating difference, not only communities that are immigrant communities or refugee communities, because there are some Latino refugee communities who are asylees or parolees from other Caribbean countries, for example, and now including things around sexual orientation. So those two mixed together, the tweets and the trolls who were under news reports is just disheartening, disgusting, and nauseating. It's really awful what some people are thinking and willing to put out there. So it's very horrific for us. And as a community, we know who we are and we know what we bring. But we know there's a segment of our community out there that just really has a whole other mentality that doesn't want to see any positive immigrant or refugee integration in our community, which is unfortunate because it's a very isolating kind of perspective and life that they're living. So that's been very difficult.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any perspectives, just as we think about being in the midst of this presidential election and other recent events that have unfolded?
There's a myth that refugees cost a lot of money, but when I came to this country, I paid one-way travel loan. I took one-way travel loan, and I paid $1,300. So when I came, I got around $1,000 of support, and so far I have contributed back to the system through personal and property tax around $80,000 already, and I will pay until my last breath, that's for sure. And also, we see refugees as a burden, but they are really asset. So if you see the Bhutanese community, we have been coming since early 2008, and this Saturday is my 8th anniversary in America, being 8 years old. Thank you. So within just Bhutanese community, we started buying a house in late 2010, and until this year, we have 19 houses bought so far, 17 in Southeast Portland and 2 in Beaverton. Just imagine, just coming like $10 in pants pocket with the ID or plastic bag and starting all over again. And we have to see their courage, resiliency, their strength, their contribution, not as an enemy. And we blame refugees so much already. We blame German Jews as a German agent, or Chinese agent, or Russian Jews agent. So this kind of, and also we blame Mexican drug runners like this. So we are enough saying those are blaming on refugees. So we need to stop on this. So I know it's election year, more you make that bad noise, you make it, I mean, we have seen some of the political figures saying that and getting their numbers up. But I think we really need to welcome refugees, and also our history of bringing refugees. In 1980, we resettled 270,000 refugees where Vietnamese were in crisis, so we got them here. In 2002, after 9/11, we got 27,000, but Oregon received 1,126 refugees. So we are more welcoming than other states, and thank you all for doing this. This is very welcoming comparing other cities.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about how, if you don't know, Oregon is a ballot measure state where a lot of people are pushing money to be able to say that if Oregon was able to pass this measure, if Oregon was able to pass this law, that we can do it in other states. We've noticed this in 2014, where there was a Measure 88 bill that would allow undocumented folks in Oregon being able to access a driver's card, which is needed for them to be able to take their loved ones, their children, their parents to work, church, school, etc. And we were able to mobilize folks with so little money to be able to build so much capacity. And because of this, a lot of people are feeling hurt that we were able to say that we can legalize marijuana in 2014, but you cannot legalize my mother, you cannot legalize my sister, you cannot legalize my brother. And this makes it hard for people to be able to stand within other people within the political landscape, to be engaged, to be mobilized, and being able to turn in the ballot. And we are noticing that the United States, not just in Oregon, is also turning into this way of pushing people away from being able to engage in politics and being able to vote with some laws, the Real ID Act, which is making it harder for folks to be able to access a license or whatnot, to be able to go to the polls, to be able to vote, and how we are making sure that folks who such as the presumptive Republican nominee, might be able to become president, which is scary. And that even though this person is saying a lot of hurtful things, it's enraging people. And I don't know if just enraging people will be able to make them active in the political landscape.
Victoria?
As I mentioned before, in employee resource group, we have people from many different countries, from many different religions. In my heart, for my friends and colleagues, I'm thinking about how does it feels. It's like feel scared, feel uncertain, and how people build their families. They came to this country just, they're thinking about how to do professional development, how to work and serve communities. And it's heartbreaking to see those fears in their eyes, that uncertainty, what's there for me here tomorrow.
Victoria, I'm also wondering if, based on some of your work through this employee resource group, which I see as creating a space for some employees to come together, we know from some of these experiences and the narratives that that social isolation can be very traumatic, and that creating those spaces in our lives, because our identities are not just immigrants and refugees, but also include other experiences and other expertise from countries or places we've been before. So other than the employee resource group, what are other things that people are not talking about that will enable these groups to continue being here in Portland? So I guess other than the employee resource group or through the employee resource group, what are other ways that immigrants and refugees can create community and create that comfort with being here in Portland? Thank you.
Well, being here in the City Club, and I think it's important to be invited to the decision-making process, to be part of that, not just the subject matter, but to be involved in that, in this process. I think this is very important. You mentioned about social isolation, and it is, and I know someone is talking about, like, we are coming from collective countries, collective cultures. We work together. When even you go to the interview, it's not appropriate to say, oh, I did that, I did that, I did that. It seems like you have to say, well, we in my team. So that's the create community-based organizations, and we do have, and we're working with them. I think it's important to give opportunity people to participate in many events, and well, to help integrate, to look at this, what's this integration and what's assimilation, and help people integrate to the society.
Absolutely. If you are just turning in for today's Friday Forum, I am Nissan Kwan, joined by Victoria Cross, Multnomah County Central Human Resources, Zack Muhammad, Leadership Development Coordinator, Unite Oregon, Linda Castillo, Mental Health and Community-Based Services with Latino Network, and Subedi with Portland Parks and Recreation. This next question is for Zack. I'm curious if you are comfortable sharing, how difficult is it navigating Portland as an African refugee, yet being considered as an African American?
So that's a good question. I hold so many identities, and I weave through all of my identities. I identify myself as Black, African, African American, queer male, Muslim. So I am open to all of these identities, and sometimes I wear all of these hats at the same time. Sometimes I wear some of the hats, how comfortable I am and how open I am and trusting I am of who's around in the table. And I want to say that it's difficult because at times I notice my counterparts. So if I'm holding the African American hat and hearing so many negative things around African people, and this divide, this tension was created by the mainstream media, it was created by the dominant culture. So this is colonialism happening here today in 2016 of how we are dividing communities, we are making them pitting against each other to, I don't know what answer that it's supposed to happen, but it's definitely happening where African people are doing the same thing, vice versa, saying that, oh, we weren't enslaved, we aren't this and that, but colonization is just another form of slavery, and how a lot of us here might have faced some sort of colonization within our home country, and how we are still facing the implications of colonization, neoliberalism here today. And I am working to make sure that is not a real thing, of how we are going to connect communities to talk about how we are not going to spread hate and how we're going to love each other, and being able to foster relationships, to build the relationships that's needed, because it really takes all of us to be able to do the work and to make it progressive as it can be.
Any other?
To this point, to welcome refugees, I think first, when I came to this Portland, I didn't know I had my accent, because I was used to the British accent, right? So, and it's not my problem only. And if you see, I heard in data, every 50 miles, there's a different accent. So it's not just only my accent, because I came from 10,000 miles away to Portland. I think accepting their presence, and I said accent, I think that's the starting point. And you can mentor, you don't have to, we talk about refugees too much already, so we need to talk to them straight. Talk to them, ask their challenges, what are they going through, advocate for them. So the average resettlement in the US is just 70,000. We have 60 million people, men and women and children, displaced around the country, around the world at this moment. So we resettle only 70,000. We only provide life to 70,000 every year. But we need, and this year we increased to 85,000. But let's work together. Let's advocate in Congress and ask for at least 100,000 refugees from next year. That's how we can help refugees and open up our doors.
Linda and Victoria, so as Zack highlighted, we know that identity is very intersectional, or not always one all-encompassing identity, and that oftentimes so many communities of color or other culturally specific communities can have to do sort of cultural code switching. And I'm wondering, just as we kind of move toward the ending and more of a personal experience, are you comfortable sharing any of the ways that you've also found yourself to have to do this kind of code switching, and also any personal experience where you find that you are more than just your identity as an immigrant or a refugee? Linda?
Well, I can say some of that code switching happens for me without me asking for it. For example, when I identify myself as Latina or Mexican American, and folks say, "No, you're not really. No, it can't possibly be." So it gets into this very strange domain of who you are and what you are. And I think we, as communities of color and bilingual or multilingual communities, will find ourselves being able to kind of be in those different spaces. When you're speaking your native language, there's a certain community that you're speaking to. When you're speaking with the mainstream community, there's a certain way you're speaking to them. When you're speaking with multicultural group, there's a certain way that you're speaking with folks. So I think for us, it kind of presents an asset of this fluidity to be able to go back and forth, to have this bilingualism, this multiculturalism, this ability to just be able to fit in the situation and allow ourselves to integrate as best we can. I think one of the points I just quickly wanted to make about what are governments doing to help immigrant and refugee communities integrate into our communities in general. I think recently we had some wonderful news. We have had for quite some time a new Portlanders Policy Council at the City of Portland, and just last week it was voted unanimously to become a commission, and that's a big, big deal. And the reason that it's a big, big deal is that it's going to finally allow this group of folks who are from nonprofits, from a variety of refugee and immigrant nonprofits throughout the City of Portland, and mutual aid assistance associations and city government, representatives from the various bureaus, to come together and start to work on an annual plan, to start to develop some best practices together, and to really start to develop some policy that really looks very specifically how to deliberately integrate newcomer communities into our community. So it's really some active democracy that's happening in our state. So I'm a co-chair along with Lipo Cha, who's the executive director over at ERCO. And so we have a big agenda ahead of us, and we have a lot of folks who are here who are going to be part of that and supporting us, and we look forward to all your support as well to have that happen, because a diverse community is a community that's going to survive and is a community that's much more sustainable.
Victoria?
I would like to talk about identities. We often talk at our employee resource groups, because we have people who doctors from different countries, who lawyers from different countries, engineers. And what I hear and experience myself, when you start to talk and people hear your accent with all your credentials going down. So that's how people feel. I would like to more talk about identity. It's regarding our children. Children who grew up with immigrant and refugee households. Thinking about their identity, because sometimes children come in like at age 8, and they speak English, they pick up English really quickly. So in many cases, what's happening, they become more culturally they're cultural guides for their parents. I remember that story a few years ago. One of the real estate agents called and said, a 10 years old Russian boy calling me, he said his parents want to buy a house. He thought it's a practical joke. Well, it wasn't. His parents don't speak any English. They have jobs. They were able to buy a house, but so they asked, 10 years old, okay, well, you provide us. I think more about identity, how they feel. How they feel like, can they ask their classmates to their home? Do they ashamed the people, their parents don't speak English or speak with accent? I'm thinking about our children, for them to balance this identity.
Absolutely. We are now going to open up the floor for questions from the audience. Please remember that asking questions from the mic is a privilege of City Club membership. If you are not a City Club member, you can write your question on a note and hold it up for a City Club staff member to take.
Hi, I'm Sharon Robbins, City Club member. First off, I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming and sharing with us. This is such an important conversation. I wanted to ask you about the word assimilation, because it's being thrown around a lot right now, and sometimes it's almost like it's a weapon, that word. And I was just wondering what you think about that word, what it means to you, if there's another word that better encompasses what you want to do and feel like you need to do to be part of the larger community. and not feel so separated?
Absolutely. I do believe that the assimilation is a term and a tool that can really create that us versus them, and I'm going to pose that question to Zack.
So assimilation to me is a good thing and a bad thing. In a way, it can be good is because you are accepted in the United States. You can sit with us, you can be amongst us, and assimilation can look bad in ways of cultural erosion, of how we know that there are languages being lost in the world right now, and because you are assimilating to the language English, it means that you are giving up your culture, your language. What does it mean to be someone who is Muslim like myself, who does not celebrate Christmas, but yet you are yearning and you are wanting Christmas because all of your schoolmates are getting presents, and it's a weird term for me, assimilation, because I've always been brought by my family to be able to hone into my culture, to be able to be celebrating my culture, be proud of my culture. And I want to thank my mom and my family to be able to do that. And I know a lot of folks aren't able to have that because they don't want to be targeted. They don't want to be attacked. They don't want to be left out. So it's also about moving up in a way.
We have a question on this card. Do we, and I'm actually going to direct it to Sam, do we yet have a or to any of the other panelists, do we have a cross-agency multi-organization committee? So a group that is between governments or between various agencies or organizations in the area that are dedicated explicitly to refugee planning, advocacy, and networking.
City of Portland formally accepted New Portland's Policy Commission, and we have been working since 2 years to form this commission. Little tricky, city government works little tricky. So a lot of agencies who work for refugees, city provides grants. And that's a partnership we do with the agencies. But agencies who is working with refugees, they get a lot of federal grants. I think New Portland's Commission will create that opportunity down the road. I think so that we can implement what refugee and immigrants visioned moving forward. So we can, and it's just a dynamic. We still like continuously partner with the communities working with refugees.
Another question from the audience?
Thank you. Carol Witherill. First of all, I too wish to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your stories with such generosity, courage, authenticity, and inspiration. I really appreciate that, and I think everyone sitting here does as well. I also was I was moved and saddened and inspired by these stories. I learned a great deal and want to pursue what I've learned. And my question is, what experiences have you or your children or other children in the community have had in schools, specific experiences or a story that sort of became emblematic of the challenges or the inspiration that they experienced? And what would you say to educators to help them, all of us, be more aware of ways to support refugee and immigrant communities and their children? Thank you.
Linda, given all your work at Latino Network within the community engagement, can you just speak to this question?
I guess one of the things as adults, we are role models. And I think the importance of us really not being afraid to navigate these very uncomfortable, difficult kind of conversations that may come up. And so I think as adults, we need to practice them amongst ourselves and not with children first. I think we just really need to get better at that. But that being said, I also think there's wonderful opportunity for children who are in diverse classrooms, or there's a mainstream classroom and maybe there's a few students from other countries, to be able to have open dialogue and conversations about difference, about communities, about background, about appearances, about all these different things in a very safe way. But I think it also requires that teachers and folks who are having these conversations get some good training, get some good information, get some good reinforcement and support to have these conversations, because those conversations are how people learn, how people are going to start to have ability to have conversations, and hopefully over time feel a little more at ease with someone who's different than they are. We're going to make mistakes, you know, we're going to unintentionally insult each other, and I think for many of us in immigrant and refugee communities, we kind of take this grace and we go, okay, take a breath. You know, for whatever reason that came out that way, let's figure out where that's really coming from and try to understand that and ask another question and try to keep the dialogue going in a positive way that doesn't disrupt or rupture that connection, but kind of creates and reinforces a positive interaction. So there's opportunity for learning for us, and certainly for mainstream communities who are maybe not familiar with other groups. Yeah.
Victoria, I see, is really excited to answer this question.
Absolutely, yeah. I came and I have a 12-year-old daughter. I came to United States with a 12-year-old daughter. And what I learned, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't know what to ask, because I didn't know that some resources will exist. And I think it's very important. And I heard from my friends who said, you know, we came from different countries with different cultural norms, with different rules. We teach children one thing, school teach them different, and we make them be in trouble. So we need to know what school teach them. It's for, so work with parents. Don't ask what you need, or don't ask like what you want to know, because they don't know. And another thing, I think it's very important to remember with children, they really want to be fit. They want to be like other children. And sometimes you're asking them, like, pay attention, more than pay attention than other children in class, and they feel really uncomfortable. Why? I'm like others. So that's, I think it's two things that I will give.
Do we have another question from the audience?
I'm Bill Harris, a member of the City Club. There are an immense number of Middle Eastern refugees of war and a variety of trouble. That number is giant. Governor Brown has made a very favorable comment regarding the welcoming of people from this massive number into Oregon. Do you have any advice or comments you would be willing to make about this large number of folks without a satisfactory place to be, and how the United States might best go about responding to that?
Anyone to take? Zach?
So I identify myself as Muslim. So with that being told, Islam has 1.6 billion people in the world, and we are able to connect through the religion, but there are folks in the Middle East right now facing a lot of difficulties through civil wars, through a lot of genocide, and ways that people are being pushed away from their home countries. And one thing I will say is when they are coming to the United States, a lot of times they are being resettled in really, really small rural areas. So when I mean rural areas, I mean a little bit outside of the metro area. So there are folks being placed in McMinnville, there are folks being placed in Newburgh. And we know there's a lot of tensions, racial tensions in a lot of these areas. And for folks being able to start new at a place that is difficult is super hard, and we know that a lot of folks just need to be amongst folks who are just like them, and services go so long, so many ways, but also how do we build and maintain and grow their capacity as well too, of learning how to navigate around the United States system, whether it's education, political, social, and whatnot. Yeah.
How are we doing on time? Do we have?
Just about out of time.
That's what I thought.
Unfortunately, we were out of broadcast time today. This has been a really enlightening conversation, but unfortunately, we have to stop for the day. If this program has inspired you to join City Club, you can do so at the registration table as you leave the room today. Please join me in thanking this incredible panel for sharing stories that I think are incredibly important for us to hear today in the scary things that are happening in our world. This is Courtney Nelson, President of City Club. Big thank you again to our panel, for all of you for being here today, and to Walter Robinson of the Friday Forum Committee who produced our program. We are adjourned.